All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a look at a piece called A Beautiful Place to Get Lost.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it's a fascinating read, kind of a collection of philosophical musings and reflections on life and love and truth, all that good stuff.
I see. So, like, we're peeking into the author's mind as they ponder the big questions.
Exactly. And our mission today is to analyze this text and see if we can figure out if it's really profound or just kind of surface level.
Okay, so right off the bat, what strikes me is the way it's written, this stream of consciousness style, almost like you're eavesdropping on the author's thoughts as they unfold.
Yeah, you really do feel like you're part of this intimate conversation. And the way the author directly addresses the reader, you, makes it surprisingly conversational for such a philosophical topic.
Right, it pulls you in and you feel like you have to participate in this exploration with them.
And then there are all those rhetorical questions, like they're challenging you to confront these ideas head on. Did you find yourself getting drawn into those questions?
Absolutely. It's so effective. It makes you an active participant rather than just passively reading along?
For sure. And it's not just the questions, it's the whole flow of the sentences. Those long, winding sentences packed with imagery and ideas.
hmm
Reminds me of authors like Virginia Woolf or Jack Kerouac, masters of that free-flowing, introspective style.
Oh, that's a great comparison. They really were. And I notice how the author keeps circling back to certain ideas and phrases, almost like they're wrestling with them, trying to understand them from every angle.
It's like they're spiraling around these concepts, coming at them from different directions. Do you think this repetition serves a purpose?
I think it's intentional. I mean, we're dealing with some pretty vast, complex themes here.
Hmm.
And the repetition emphasizes that cyclical nature of thought. You know, how we keep grappling with these big questions throughout our lives.
It definitely reflects that struggle for understanding, right?
Absolutely.
Now, let's talk about some of the literary devices at play here. One thing that really jumped out at me was the author's use of metaphors. They compare life to a journey, a game, a dance. The mind is a cage, a monkey. Love is melting, overflowing. These metaphors are everywhere.
It's true, and they're so powerful in conveying these abstract concepts in a way that really resonates.
Yeah, they stick with you.
Like that classic one, life is a journey. It implies constant movement, growth, the sense of searching.
It really makes you think about how that resonates with you personally, listener.
Exactly, and these metaphors aren't just decorative. They make you connect to the ideas in a deeper way. They're thought-provoking.
I noticed another device, though, something a bit more challenging. They throw out these paradoxical statements like meaningless meaning, these contradictions that make you scratch your head.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean, and that's actually clever technique.
You think it's deliberate?
Definitely, those paradoxes highlight the inherent contradictions we face as humans, the authors acknowledging that language and thought can only take us so far.
It's like they're saying, hey, words can't fully grasp the universe, and they're inviting us to go beyond those limitations.
Exactly. Which leads us to the ideas themselves. This text tackles some pretty profound stuff. The limitations of thought, the illusion of self, the search for truth. What stood out to you?
Well, for me, there are definitely echoes of Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and Taoism, particularly those themes of non-duality and impermanence.
I agree. And the author seems to be suggesting that our sense of self is always in flux, and true freedom comes from accepting this, right?
It's like that saying, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man.
Right, I love that one.
But there are also hints of existentialism in there too, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure. Especially that idea of finding meaning in a world that might be inherently meaningless. It's quite the mix.
So it's like the authors weaving together these different philosophical threads, creating their own unique tapestry of ideas.
Yeah, it's not just rehashing old ideas, it's exploring the human condition from a fresh perspective.
But the big question is, does it come across as genuine, or is it just a shallow attempt at sounding profound?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. So far, I'm leaning towards genuine, but there are moments where the writing gets a little meandering.
True, it doesn't always follow a straight path, and that can be challenging for some readers.
So maybe that's part of the point, getting lost in the text, embracing the uncertainty and ambiguity, and finding your own way through it.
Possibly. It's definitely not a text for those who want easy answers or neat conclusions. It's more about the journey of questioning and exploration.
It is, and on that note, I think it's a great place to pause and hear what you think, listener. Do you find the author's style engaging? Are you intrigued by the ideas? Stay with us, and we'll be right back to dive deeper into A Beautiful Place to Get Lost.
Picking up where we left off, I think it's worth exploring this whole meaningless meaning thing a little further. It's one of those ideas that can really make you stop and think.
It definitely got my attention. It seemed kind of paradoxical on the surface. Like, how can something be meaningless, AD meaningful?
That's the beauty of a paradox, isn't it? It forces us to confront the limits of our normal ways of thinking. What the author seems to be getting at is that the meaning we give to things, it's ultimately arbitrary. It comes from us, not from some inherent quality in the thing itself.
So you're saying that meaning is subjective? It depends on the individual's perspective.
Exactly. Like, think about it this way. A sunset can be so meaningful to one person. It evokes feelings of awe and beauty. But to someone else, it might just be the end of another day. The sunset itself hasn't changed, but the meaning we project onto it is totally different.
That's a great example. Makes you wonder about the implications for our lives, right? If meaning is truly subjective, does that mean anything goes? Is there no such thing as truth or objective reality?
That's a question philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries, and the author doesn't shy away from it. They seem to be suggesting that while there may be an objective reality out there, our perception of it is always filtered through our own experiences, our beliefs and values. So in a sense, we each create our own reality.
That's a pretty powerful thought.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how much power we have in shaping our own experiences.
Yeah.
But it also raises questions about communication. If we're all living in our own little subjective worlds, how can we ever truly understand each other?
That's a key challenge the author highlights. They acknowledge the limitations of language, pointing out that words are just symbols. They can never fully encapsulate the complexity of our inner world or guarantee that our meaning will be perfectly transmitted to another person.
It's almost like they're saying the more we try to grasp meaning through language, the more it slips through our fingers.
That's a very poetic way to put it. And it brings us to another major theme, the idea of letting go. The author repeatedly emphasizes the importance of surrendering to the present moment, accepting things as they are, and releasing our attachments to outcomes.
It does seem to be a recurring theme in a lot of philosophical and spiritual traditions.
Right.
But it's easier said than done. Letting go can be incredibly difficult, especially when we're facing tough situations or painful emotions.
Absolutely. It's a practice, not a destination. The author acknowledges that we're creatures of habit, often clinging to familiar patterns even when they cause us suffering. But they suggest that true freedom comes from breaking free from those patterns, from letting go of our need to control everything.
It makes me think of that metaphor of the mind as a cage we talked about earlier.
Right.
Letting go is like opening the door of that cage and stepping into the unknown, embracing the uncertainty of life.
That's a beautiful image. And it connects to another important idea in the text, the transformative power of love. The author seems to view love not just as a romantic feeling, but as a way of being, a way of relating to the world that is characterized by openness, acceptance, and compassion.
It's interesting how they contrast love with fear. They argue that fear closes us down, creates boundaries, and ultimately leads to suffering. Love, on the other hand, expands our hearts, connects us to something bigger than ourselves, and allows us to experience the fullness of life.
And they link this back to letting go. When we let go of fear, they suggest we naturally open ourselves up to love. We become more present, more compassionate, and more connected to the world around us.
You know, it's fascinating how all these seemingly disparate ideas start to weave together as we explore them further. There's this sense of interconnectedness, a feeling that everything is ultimately pointing back to this core message of acceptance, presence, and love.
Exactly. It's like the author is creating a tapestry of wisdom, drawing from different philosophical traditions, personal experiences, and even paradoxes to reveal a deeper truth about being human.
But that brings us to a bit of a tricky question. Is this a carefully constructed philosophy? Or are there inconsistencies or contradictions in the author's ideas? We've already touched on one potential contradiction, the idea that words are limited while the author relies on them to communicate these ideas. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a sharp observation, and it's a point worth considering. The tension between the author's message and the medium they use to convey it is definitely there. On one hand, they advocate for letting go of thought and embracing the limitations of language, but on the other hand, they've created this intricate text filled with ideas and arguments, inviting us to engage in intellectual analysis. It's a bit of a puzzle.
It's like they're saying, don't get too caught up in words. But then they write this whole book encouraging us to find meaning in them. Does that make the text hypocritical, or is there something more going on here?
That's the question, isn't it? Perhaps it's a deliberate choice, a way of acknowledging that paradox of our existence. Even as we gain insights into the limitations of thought and language, we're still operating within those systems. It's a reminder that self-discovery is ongoing, full of twists and turns and even contradictions.
That's a really insightful way to look at it. It's not about achieving some perfect state of enlightenment where all the contradictions disappear. It's about embracing the messiness, the uncertainty, and the constant evolution of our understanding.
And maybe that's part of what makes this text so compelling. It doesn't offer easy answers or a clear roadmap. It's an invitation to explore, to question, to get lost in the beauty of not knowing.
Okay, listener, we've covered a lot of ground in this section. Before we wrap up our deep dive, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this idea of meaningless meaning? Does it resonate with you? Does it challenge your assumptions about truth and reality? Share your thoughts with us on social media, and join us for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the author's overall tone and approach and consider whether this text truly lives up to its title, A Beautiful Place to Get Lost. So welcome back to our deep dive into A Beautiful Place to Get Lost. We've been talking about the author's style, all those metaphors, and the big philosophical ideas. Now, let's step back for a second. What about the overall tone? How would you describe it? Preachy, poetic, something else entirely?
Preachy? I don't think so. It doesn't feel like the author's trying to force their beliefs on us, more like sharing their personal journey with these questions.
Yeah, it feels very vulnerable, like they're saying, look, I'm figuring this out as I go, and you can come along. And there are those moments of beauty in the language. Almost poetic, makes those tough ideas go down a bit easier.
For sure. The author blends those philosophical insights with such vivid imagery. It's not just an intellectual thing, you really feel it too.
Right. Speaking of which, the author seems pretty interested in how we think, the nature of thought itself.
Oh, definitely. They describe thought as this double-edged sword, capable of so much, but also so prone to getting stuck, causing suffering.
It's like they're saying, hey, mind, I see what you're doing there, but maybe take a break sometimes.
Exactly. Not saying to eliminate thought altogether, but just to be more aware of it. If we observe our thoughts without judgment, we can be a bit freer from their grip. Have you ever noticed that, listener, how your thoughts can spiral? This text is saying, step back, be the observer, don't get swept away.
Like that saying, don't believe everything you think. So one last piece I'm curious about. Who is this text really for? Who do you think the author is trying to reach?
I think it's for anyone who, feels drawn to those deeper questions about life and meaning. The seekers, the questioners, the people who aren't satisfied with easy answers.
People willing to get a little lost along the way. Embrace the uncertainty. So after spending time with A Beautiful Place to Get Lost, does it actually live up to its title?
I think it does in a way. It's not a physical place, of course, more like a mental and emotional space. A space where we can let go of old ideas, challenge ourselves, and see the world differently. It's about getting lost in the beauty of asking those big questions.
And maybe, by getting lost, we find ourselves. Listener, we really encourage you to check out A Beautiful Place to Get Lost, embark on your own journey, see what speaks to you, what challenges you, and get lost in the beauty of not knowing.
Remember, there's no right or wrong way to approach it. Just bring an open mind, a curious heart, and who knows, you might just stumble upon your own beautiful place to get lost.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'd love to hear your thoughts on A Beautiful Place to Get Lost. What resonated with you? What new questions came up? Share your insights with us on social media. Until next time, happy exploring.